This is Audio Gyan, and I am your host Kedar Nimkar. Welcome to a deep dive into the minds of luminaries from the Indian creative world. AudioGAN presents Improvisation, a three-part series where I talk to artists to understand spontaneity, motivations to improvise, the process of it, and when does improvisation become part of the main set. Friedrich Nietzsche's famous line, and those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music. In today's episode, we'll be talking about improvisation in dance with Avantika Bahl. Avantika is a dance practitioner and educator based in Mumbai. As an artist, she works towards creating inclusive performances that can be accessed by larger community. Over the past few years, her choreographic choices have brought diverse voices and experiences to the mainstream. She studied at London Contemporary Dance School and completed Curriculum in Motion program offered by Jacobs Pillow. Avantika has master's degree in English literature and completed her level 3 certification in Indian Sign Language, which we'll definitely discuss. So, welcome Avantika to AudioGAN. It's a real pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for giving your time.
Thanks for inviting me, Kedar. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Awesome. So, as I said before the recording started, I'm trying to come up with like few episodes which are like a series in a form of a series, trying to explore what is improvisation in different disciplines within the creative field. So, with dance, I thought we'll deep dive into that, but just at a meta level, what according to you is improvisation? It could be in general life, or like, is it generally happening or mostly happens in creative endeavors, or have you pondered upon it? Your work definitely is quite improvised according to me. We'll see what happens, but what does it mean to you minus the dance context?
Minus the dance context, I feel improvisation, to me, it seems like a state that feels fluid, dynamic. It feels like a state where there's more spontaneity and there's it opens up sort of space for more discovery, curiosity, play. And I think, yes, of course, as a practitioner, improvisation, of course, I look at it quite specifically within the form. But when you talk about improvisation in daily life, it's also really like improvising to, avoid your child's fifth meltdown of the day, or it's kind of improvising to see how you can pack in 42 hours in a 24-hour day, etc. So I think it's also like just this idea of sort of, it feels like constantly being on the go in daily life.
That's quite different take on it. And you have dabbled with mainly silence or mundane chores, and sometimes just like whatever clips. Unfortunately, I haven't experienced your dance like live, but whatever I've consumed online, it seems different, right? So what do you call your form of dance? Like, which category or genre does it belong, or is trying to establish something new? We'll start off from there, and then we'll see where we go.
So I think I would quite specifically locate it in contemporary dance, because I do also feel like contemporary dance is the one form that sort of leaves room for exactly this, where you're talking about where you're not quite sure, you may not necessarily be able to identify what form the movement is emerging from, but it also is sort of conceptual in nature. It's it's got some context. It's not only just looking at technical movement, but it's also sort of critically engaging with the form. And it can be multiple forms. It doesn't necessarily, you could also be a yoga practitioner. You could be, somebody whose relationship with the body perhaps emerges from not necessarily just dance in what we look at as traditional forms, but still find a language that's authentic and unique and honest. And I find that that's where, contemporary dance is able to sort of embrace all these other almost non-defined sort of performances and forms. Yeah.
Hmm. Is it safe to say that there are directives and there are formats and there are templates and there are defined boundaries in traditional ones, and contemporary you're pushing the boundary further? Or how do you define them, or how would you bucket them, like traditional versus contemporary?
I I think great question. I think the thing is with traditional forms, obviously there's a very very specific structure that you're working with, right?
Hmm.
Whether it's in language, whether it's in just movement technique, whether it's just looking at sort of like the physicality and body as well, and also of course the repertoire of movement, right? So there, while it is quite rigidly defined in traditional forms, contemporary dance, what it does is sort of is gives one the freedom to be able to loosen those rules a little bit more. Having said that, it doesn't mean that there's no structure, there are no rules in contemporary dance. Obviously, your point of entry and your preoccupations and your line of inquiry is what eventually leads the work to become a complete work. But what it does do is that it just gives room to breathe outside of really fixed definitions and pre-mediated structures.
Hmm. Hmm. If I may choose to go further abstract, so can then contemporary become traditional eventually?
So if you look at the history of just dance in the West, what was considered contemporary back in the day is now considered modern. And so basically, for example, I think also I find that contemporary, just the word, like just as the name suggests, it's quite
Time
rooted
bound.
here and now.
Hmm.
It's what's happening today. It's what's being made today. Of course, it does carry some version of a legacy, but it's not. I think the contemporary dance form is not necessarily sort of burdened by that legacy. So if so we had classical ballet, and then many forms emerged from those which back then were considered contemporary and today are considered modern. So it's also the evolution of forms and how, how you're able to look back at what was being created by back then. So yes, I think what was contemporary then has now become very structured forms that we call sort of modern dance, etc. So
Yeah, quite interesting. So okay, so what does it mean to improvise now in the context of dance, right? Especially with your kind of style, what guides improvisation for you? Is it the body movement? Is it the music? Is it the location?
yeah, so
Story? No, story. Yeah, I was just saying, is it the story, narrative? Yeah.
yeah. I think first I'll just sort of broadly define what improvisation means to me. And then I'm going to answer this question in two parts, and then of course talk about what are some of the points of entry in improvised work for me as a
Mm.
maker. So I think first of all, like improvisation is when, I mean, we have spoken about this, but it is also when you're willing to sort of just stretch the prescribed preset boundaries a little bit. Um, I find that it's also sort of it lends itself out a little bit beyond a form that you may already carry in your body or a certain kind of knowledge that you may carry. In some ways, I also find that it's exactly the opposite of sort of structured, predefined, premeditated movement. That's perhaps designed in greater detail. Improvisation for me leaves room for spontaneity. It leaves room for sort of just more sometimes instinctive responses, but also those that then lead to larger questioning of just being able to look at movement language, look at one's own movement language. So I find that improvisation leaves space and leaves room for that. A lot of people do feel like, it can be quite knee jerk. It can be, very sort of just first layer. But I think there is merit in that, because there's also, I do find that some of the greatest discoveries are unlocked in improvising as well. And as far as what can lead to improvisation, it can be multiple things. It doesn't necessarily have to be looking at just sort of one initiating theme. It could be, like you said, it can be, it can be very things. It depends also on what your interest is at that point. And that could be the takeoff for, just being able to sort of develop a language within that aspect of that you're questioning in your work.
So it need not start from a narrative or what is the starting point then? You said it could be anything, but still, like, for it to take birth, there has to be some sort of a point, right?
Yes,
So,
of course. Doesn't
and
necessarily.
typically,
It doesn't have to start with a narrative. It could be a piece of text. It could be a response to architecture. It could be looking at, just looking at art, visual arts, for example. It could be responding to music. I know that sounded, but when I said it could be anything, it sounds it sounds vague, but the truth is that actually, if you are willing to respond to an impulse, then, and you can decide what the impulse is, it will lead to sort of creatively moving in the direction of that response.
I remember, actually, this is how AudioCan has kind of little bit enriched me, because I remember listening to one talk by Dr. Ashok Ranade, and he said, I think there are 4 or 5 stages of music, and the first is the sheer desire, like अंदर से आवाज आती है या whatever. There is a thought. There's a I forgot the exact word that he used, but it was very beautiful. And then it's humming and so on and so forth. Finally, you land up in a song. So in here, I think it's always a thought or a response. Is that fair to say?
I think a thought or a response, or just a line of questioning. I mean, I would perhaps be interested in sort of looking at how my spine moves, in whether I'm, let's say under an emotional response of my spine. What does that mean? So when I'm upset, or when I'm tense, or I'm angry, or I'm happy, what does that do to my spine and therefore my physicality? And that can sort of create a whole sort of rich language that's unique to me. And I think that's what I find very fascinating about improvisation. One, it's very hard to repeat. It's very hard. It can't be taught. What I'm improvising cannot be taught. I can offer these as tools. I can offer these impulses as points of entry for somebody else. But exactly what my body does and how it responds is not going to be what somebody else does.
That's quite interesting, because maybe we can take an example of your show, Say What, and actually we'll come to that a bit later. But when you said this, like, how do you, or what makes this performance, or what this act of dance palatable? Because it's quite as abstract, right? So why should one watch it?
I don't know. I can't answer that question. Why does one? I don't know. I mean, do you understand everything when you go to a gallery? I mean, when you're looking at an artwork, do you, especially something that's not necessarily depicting a scenario or depicting nature. I think the beauty of, for me specifically, contemporary dance is that it also leaves room for meaning making that can be that's very individual and unique to the viewer. Right? So at the crux of it, however, I do feel that for me specifically, what's important for me is just the human just this very human connection, right? There has to be something that the viewer watches and is able to take back, not maybe not necessarily emotionally, but also just have a moment of, these are the things I experienced, or these are the things I thought of when I watched this work.
Yeah, correct.
And
No, I can. Sorry, go ahead.
I just feel like it's also very hard to kind of, you carry work with you, you carry performances, you carry it back. I mean, I have never ever, whether it's been a performance I've liked or not liked as much, not thought about it even 3 days later. It's things that kind of just the remnants of that sort of continue echoing in your mind. And palatable or not, I don't know. Certainly it leaves some kind of imprint in your heart, I feel. Yeah.
No, I remember interviewing Sogato Bhaduri, and we spoke about what are aesthetics, and he nicely mentioned that it's finally a sensory experience. So it may or may not have a meaning to it, and you
Yeah.
may not even connect, or there is no story, or there's nothing. It's just an experience. And if nothing else, maybe we can fall back to Nietzsche saying that they couldn't hear the music.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think exactly that. I think it's hard to define sometimes. A lot of, especially perhaps people who may not be watching as many performance works, may not have the language to be able to express why they liked the work or didn't. But there's no hiding away from how you feel, how it moves you.
Yeah.
You-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. That also, I can have a plug on my own show, but I have started writing. I have started writing a blog post called "The Larger Context," and
Mhm.
today's, as in like I send a newsletter every Monday, and it was exactly the same. That why do people don't like art? As in why do they ask meaning when they look at art? And
Yeah.
it's on the same lines. Cool. And when we compare traditional dance, at least from my knowledge, there has been a lot of simplicity, a lot of elegance, a lot of effortlessness, सहजता जिसको बोलते हैं, is I've
Yeah.
seen that peculiarly.
Yeah.
But when I look at contemporary, not that I've like done a lot of watching, but a lot of viewing, but I've seen, because it's improvisation, there is some sort of a inherent struggle or a conflict, or I don't know, there's something which is happening quite different. So have you able to spot it? Is it like, does it happen, or why does it happen? Or maybe to make that sort of an expression, do you need to know some basic rules which can be bent later? Is it
Right.
improvisation?
Okay. So I'm going to try again answering this question in multiple parts.
Sure.
The first is just for you, just to kind of be able to also put out there that not everything that happens in contemporary dance is improvised, right? Because also, there's one which is there's one kind of improvisation that's ephemeral, that happens, and there, then it's gone. That's it. That's how long it lasted. And there's another kind of sort of improvisation or deep diving or research or investigation, okay, that begins obviously with kind of maybe outside of a sort of very prescribed form, but eventually it is structured. So it does fall into structure, right? Because there will be some kind of rules, or there will be some kind of almost like uh, qualities that will be set, or some kind of just certain points that one has to look at, and within that you start the improvisation. So not all dance is only improvised, while some of it is, and while some of it might be the starting point, while improvisation might be the starting point, eventually the reason it becomes a whole and complete work is also because within that structures are put into place.
Got
Right?
it.
So uh, to you to know the rules, you bend the rules, yes, but not all improvisation comes from needing to bend a rule. Improvisation, I feel, can also exist in itself as a whole. It doesn't necessarily have to negate or doesn't necessarily have to uh,
Challenge.
challenge or contradict something that's already been established, because the idea of improvisation is not as an antithesis to what's out there. It's 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 whole and complete in itself. While some improvisation is about breaking rules, other forms of improvisation is not. It's just about using a starting point and seeing where that takes you.
And can it, obviously it should happen, but still, what are your thoughts? So, like, while you are working on it, you are further pushing the boundaries, maybe on the fly, or maybe during the performance, or any act of improvisation. Would you classify that somewhere, or it's still it's still in the same rhythm? So what I wanted to say was that you start off with a thought which is kind of improvised, and then you play around everything, you choreograph the entire piece, but actual performance also you explore something, which typically happens in Hindustani music, right? You go that extra mile. So will that be classified as the part of it, or it's improvisation within improvisation?
I don't know. I don't know. I think that's also sort of it's I think it's what you make of it as a performer, you know. At that point, when you're performing, I don't know how much I'm thinking of, okay, I need to improvise within this so that I can find more. But I think as a performer, one tends to also, there is obviously that relationship with a viewer, you know. It's very different from when you're in the studio and when you've got, you know, people watching you, and that automatically unlocks certain things in the performance that can further be investigated when you go back into the studio, etc. So during the performance, I don't know if it's improvisation, while there may be room in a performance that, you know, to say that, okay, this is, see what you feel, do it there and then, and see what comes up. You know, but to go back to that again, I feel like you keep going back to that, exactly this, like go more vertical than horizontal with each performance.
So can you take, like, say, example of Say What, with your creative partner who's deaf? So, like, what was that? How did that come to be, or what was the biggest challenge while doing these kind of experiments? And I was reading one of your article. You also said, like, we just have to be still and dance.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, can you give us I know it's extensively documented, but yeah, maybe like first time something for me.
Yeah. So Say What, I actually started learning the Indian Sign Language back in 2015, and I realized how visceral it is. And I also realized how sign language is, it's not independent of just your physicality. So you can't only just locate signs in your hands and not have your body and your face involved. And for me, that is just the, you know, that just seemed like exactly some of the principles that dance begins with as well, right? Because it's being able to kind of express without words. It's being, you know, you're using your body, you're using your physicality. And as I continued sort of learning sign language, I found more and more that I got very excited by the prospect of seeing what happens when these two worlds collide, what happens when sign language and movement collide. And that's when I met Vishal, who's deaf, and he was also, he had been dancing, but he sort of understood dance, of course, very specifically, because he was in a dance class that used to teach Bollywood, when he would just follow these Bollywood steps on a 1 to 8 count. So I think also what he understood as dance and movement, and where I came from, we had to first sort of find equitable ground with that. And also we had to kind of move beyond what I looked at, traditionally as movement, and some of my, what excited me as points of entry, and also what excited him. We had to sort of find ways for these two worlds to collide, and something that lay outside of the realm of sign language and the spoken word. So where do you then place communication? How do we place it? How do we create a space or a world where, whether you're deaf or you're hearing, you can come watch the work and be able to take back, just experiences of just pure, simple human communication. And that was the crux of the work. It was about how do two bodies communicate in a space that really lies outside codified form.
And like, how successful do you guys think you were, like, overall? I mean, it's quite a big case study, but generally as a creator, as a performer.
I think so a couple of things. One, I find that what did was that it created a space for a mixed audience always, and we were very, very particular about the audience being deaf and hearing together. And one, I think what was interesting was that it really changed the nature of viewing for the audience. Because as hearing audience, we are very used to kind of being seated, watching a work in silence, etc. Whereas, when you're sitting next to a deaf person, if their phone is going off, or if they're kind of eating a chocolate, they can't hear what the sound that it's creating. And so what it really did, I think, was to be able to also get the hearing audience to really listen and watch with their eyes, as opposed to kind of getting distracted by, sounds around them, which was, and I think those really brought up questions of like privilege and, access and, equal arts, etc. So every time at the end of Say What, there would always be, we'd open it up to conversation with the audience. And there were some very interesting sort of conversations around some of these ideas and around some of these sort of topics that you don't necessarily engage with unless you're put in in an uncomfortable position. And I think Say What did make a lot of people uncomfortable. So, so in that sense, and I think for me, from that point on, I got very, very interested in understanding how can the arts be a little bit more inclusive, more accessible, more equitable. What does that mean? Is it only for somebody who can afford a ticket and go into an auditorium, or can access be opened up? And of course, while I'm not saying that the world can be either or, it's not about black and white, but I've gotten more interested in just looking at works that are inclusive and accessible.
It's so magical, right? When you start inquiry in some point, there's some 1,000 doors open in different directions. Yeah. And what did you mean when you said that we just had to be still and dance? I was very intrigued by that sentence.
I think so. Vishal and I spent a year developing this work. And I think by the end of it, there was a very, very deep listening connection that we were able to form. We sort of performed the work for a good 2 years after that. Post which, unfortunately, he relocated to Japan, and but there was so the entire work is performed in absolute silence,
Hmm.
and at the most, for most of the parts, we're never looking at each other. Uh, but there's also lots and lots of sections in the work where we're doing exactly the same thing.
Hmm.
So if we were not still, we wouldn't be able to really kind of gauge and sense each other's energy in the space to be able to sort of create this movement and move together as one unit.
Hmm. Hmm. I can't actually imagine. Someone has to watch it to understand. And actually, can if we can take a step back and like how was the sign language learning experience like as a creator, as a performer, as a maker, like any learnings, any insights that you have got after learning for three
Well,
certifications.
well, I think one is that I find that sometimes I have been able to express myself better in sign language than
Wow.
words. I feel like with words sometimes there's a lot of cushioning, a lot of sort of finding uh just finding the right words. Whereas with sign, it's very clear. It's the same sign, it's how you show it. So if there is a sign for anger, whether you're mildly angry or just really pissed off, it's the same sign. But how you do it is eventually what communicates the
Hmm.
intensity of the anger, for example. Um, and and for me, I thought that it really brought me back to being able to just the principles of communication. I know we don't often think of that, but also like um just the very, very crux and the essence of communication lies in being very simply being able to say, this is what I think,
Hmm.
as opposed to kind of finding 20 nice words to cushion something
Hmm.
uncomfortable, for example.
Yeah, yeah. I remember when I was so I'm from Ruia College, Bombay, and
Yeah.
my director back then he was quite an artist, and one day he just went on a complete mourn for 1 year. He didn't speak a single word, and I think after 3 months we met, and he was trying to communicate something, and finally his father said, uh, "Most of the problems in the world are due to lack of communication."
Yeah.
And yeah, and
Yeah.
maybe he's trying to investigate that what does communication even mean.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I think the other thing I didn't answer was that what sign language gave me was the ability to be able to communicate with a deaf person. And,
Hmm.
I don't, a lot of people have asked me if I have deaf friends or family, and I don't, but that I mean, I feel like I don't know if that's enough to not want to learn sign language,
Hmm. 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 Hmm.
Yeah.
Cool. I like it's been great. I'll just change gears and we'll zoom out a bit. And I wanted to understand like improvisation in not just in like your particular work, but in your community or in your professional network, right? So why do dancers even improvise? Like, what's the kick in it, or what's the is it? I mean, as a very basic response or reaction to what I have observed, it's typically it's boredom. It's there are multiple things. Obviously, there's also creative endeavors to explore and push the boundaries, but there are many facets to it. So in dance, what do you think? I know it's not right to ask you as a larger community, but still, like, what are your How many dancers would resonate with you when you say what you say?
Oh my God. I think I definitely don't think dancers improvise out of boredom. Uh, but I think improvisation is it can be an important part of one's practice, especially when you are sort of looking for the freedom of self-expression in some form. If you are perhaps feeling a little bit uninspired, stuck,
Hmm.
um, sometimes and sometimes I also feel like it's just for a bit of fun, who
Hmm.
wants to only dance like technically, like, just form
Yeah.
based.
Yeah.
But also, I think that the beauty of improvisation is that it doesn't necessarily have to be time bound.
Hmm.
Uh, and it doesn't necessarily have to be taught.
Hmm.
So therefore, it can feel like a very personal journey and a personal space of self-expression.
Hmm. Hmm. Is it because of the medium feels short or less sometimes? The medium itself, because there are multidisciplinary artists who then digress or not digress but transpire their work from one setup to the other. Is that fair to say?
Um, I I
Like in
don't.
your like in your case, I couldn't ask because you dabbled with silence a lot, right? So, and any layman would say that music goes with
Yeah,
dance. So is it because you felt that music is inefficient or not sufficient, so you went to silence?
no. I think I'll just circle back to say what the reason why I didn't keep music was because it would then immediately not be an equal performance.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
mean, half my audience wouldn't be able to hear what's happening. My co-performer wouldn't be able to hear what's happening. What's the point of that?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, but I don't think necessarily, you know, yes, sometimes maybe the form can feel stifling, and perhaps that could be one of the reasons that somebody looks at improvisation for uh, just perhaps unlocking uh, a language that's unique to them. I'm, but I'm not sure. I don't know. I feel like I don't know how to answer this one because it's
Okay.
never, I think in performing arts, it's usually not an either or.
Hmm.
If
Hmm.
somebody decides that this is my line of inquiry, improvisation is, it's not because uh, there's not anything that they are getting from
Hmm.
another form or a form that they're kind of that they may have more knowledge in. It's just also it's space for growth, no, like it's space for
Hmm.
just continuing to just
Correct,
discover.
correct. Yeah, yeah. No, I agree with you like almost 100%. It's definitely because of the line of inquiry. It's what question you have, and then you're just going along on that is your sort of thread which is tying everything together. Now, if some other medium comes in, if some other exploration comes in, or if some improvisation happens, but
Yeah,
the line of inquiry is quite the tying thread to the entire
yeah,
act.
and quite often it comes from the form, no, because
Hmm.
you've dived into the form, you are going to have questions, and that is going to make you want to look for answers that may be outside of what the form can offer you.
Correct, correct, correct. Could you also tell us a little about Look Left, Turn Right? I was curious to know what was the gig all about.
So look left, turn right actually had started sort of again many years ago. It was also when I had started thinking about how do you make work accessible? How is one reading a work? what is what are some of just the questions that I want to raise with my work and ask. So Look Left, Turn Right is actually a performance that happens at very busy traffic signals. And the idea is to really look like just disrupt daily life. It's also, for me, it was a moment of, let's say, a passerby encountering uh, something that perhaps they cannot define, but encountering something that they don't usually. And it's that moment of magic that I was interested in. It's that moment of kind of, creating and locating it in a particular context that seemed democratic to me. And what's more democratic than a traffic signal, of course, these were also a series of structured improvisations, and it was we would kind of, there were a group of dancers, and we'd show up at different traffic signals, and I'd give them a provocation, and that would be their kind of what they'd be exploring, and those eventually became structures for a larger work that was then performed durationally at traffic signals.
But was there a pattern to it, or it was continuously improvised? Because every act would be different, because you're dealing with real life situation, right? It's not, there's no stage as such. So
No.
how did you kind of orchestrate it?
So obviously there were a few markers. The traffic sounds were the music. There were some identifiable markers that no matter what, if during the performance those sounds came up, everybody had to stop and whatever they were doing and respond to that the same way. So we kind of built structures around that. And again, it was a lot of listening. The group eventually was working together a lot. They had to watch out for each other. They had to listen to each other. Sometimes it did feel a little bit like the deaf leading the blind, because they were like, there'd be one person leading and then there's 8 people behind this dancer. And they may have kind of crossed the signal and the road was clear then, but then they've left behind 7 dancers who haven't been able to. So that's why the group really had to kind of find, again, they had to become sort of this breathing organism that moved together, and so they internally, of course, without as a unit, would keep changing the structures as and when they felt ready. So there were defined structures. They were improvising within that. They had the agency to move between them, change between them, but all of them had to make that decision together.
You have really improvised a lot. Cool. Yeah. So I'll conclude with one last question. Is that, like, what according to you is like the future of dance? Or because you have ventured into some territories which I'm totally unfamiliar to. So what's next for you, and what's next for dance as a form also? Have you given some thought about it?
I think the moment that, for me especially, I feel like if you are able to look at dance outside of formal spaces, that already opens up many, many possibilities for the work that you may be interested in creating. So the future of dance definitely for me lies outside of ticketed auditoriums. It lies outside of venues that are traditional and formal, and because of that, the things that make us want to talk about will change as well. And that's a lot of it. Like a lot of my peers, a lot of practitioners who have been making work for many, many, many years, I find that also just the way that they're able to contextualize the work um, is, is quite exciting and it's quite enriching. For me, I want to continue uh, sort of pushing what accessible work can mean for me in my line of inquiry, and and see where that takes me.
Awesome. All power to you. Sorry, I forgot to ask like one important question is that like what's like any examples of your kind of work or any people who are doing this kind of exploration and improvisation in dance whom people can look up and sort of Google them.
No, I don't know about my kind of work. There are a lot of, like I said, there are a lot of my peers and practitioners who have some, who are currently making some incredible work. So I think it's a very exciting time in India. I'm forever inspired by people who are making work, who have made work, um, you know, uh, because there's just there's so much sort of research and there's so much deep diving into the creation of the work that watching it is always sort of moving me in ways that even I can never anticipate. But I do have to say that the one choreographer who worked a lot with sort of improvisation in some sense, even though it was in a larger structure, was a choreographer called Merce Cunningham, who used the who used the what he called the chance encounters, and of course his own inspiration came from his longtime musician partner called John Cage, uh, who he had a very long-standing successful relationship with. But he would, Cunningham would make these like impromptu decisions based on the roll of a dice, for example, and that would decide how long the dancers will be on stage for, how many dancers, when are they entering, when are they exiting. So even the dancers didn't know what the work is going to become, right? Till the moment of the performance, till they literally stepped onto stage. And for me, those works are absolutely magnificent because you're coming in with your knowledge, you're coming in with your resources that you have placed, that you already have, kind of the wisdom that your body carries. But you're also always coming in into a space that is very, very uncertain. So Mark Cunningham did a lot of his works were like that, and I watching them has always been very exciting. More recently, there's a choreographer called Ohad Naren who sort of created the Gaga technique, which is now, of course, a technique, but it started with improvisation, and it is an improvisation based movement language. And again, even within that, spontaneity is the tenet of that, and it's also sort of based on this really quick response and uh, a heightened sense of listening. And that's the one technique that you may not necessarily have movement you may not necessarily have knowledge in movement of traditional movement techniques or expertise within that, but Gaga technique is one where you don't necessarily need that. So there is a lot of sort of improvising again, and the form and the technique has been constructed around some of these very basic principles.
Speaking about principles, I have one more last question. Is that to reach this level of wisdom or level of performance, do you really like what foundation has to be very strong? Because as a designer, I keep struggling and I keep quoting Miles Davis to my designers that it takes a long to sound like yourself. So you are mastering something, right? In this context, what are you mastering? Is it
I think you can't ever master it, but I think you do need I think your relationship with your own body, you need to understand your body, you need to understand, and really to be able to listen to your body and understand its impulses, understand your own physicality. There has to be a um, very deep relationship with
wow,
that. Yeah.
cool? I think on that spiritual note, I think we'll conclude. Thanks a lot for giving your time. It was great talking to you, and all the best for your future performances and all your exploration and improvisation. It was
Thank
lovely
you.
talking to you.
Thank you. Likewise. Thank you so much.
Okay, that's it. And that's it from today's GAN session. For show notes and more GAN, visit audiogan.com. And if you wish to connect with me, I am at AudioGAN Moments on Instagram. Until then, take care.